whether that's the right sentence. And obviously, I think some of the newspapers who have taken a certain delight in the BBC's embarrassment, will actually criticise it, and that's a fair debate. Some amazing things came out this morning, which we didn't know. That for 4 years the contract existed between Alex Williams and Hugh Edwards, and that I think is a surprise. But what it means is that throughout the time that he was this mental turmoil, of which the defence made much mitigation, which obviously the Chief Magistrate's largely accepted.
Paul Connew, I'm so sorry. We will come back to you for more analysis and assessment, and you know how these things work. Thank you very much, Paul Connew, for talking to us. Much more on this breaking story and the sentence just handed down at Westminster Magistrates to Hugh Edwards, the former BBC presenter.
Today at 1, Hugh Edwards has just been given a suspended 6-month prison sentence for making indecent photographs of children as young as 7. Police have released this picture of the former BBC presenter after he was charged. Westminster Magistrates Court heard this morning he paid hundreds of pounds to a convicted paedophile after being sent pornographic images. His barrister said Hugh Edwards is truly sorry and knows he has betrayed people's trust and faith.
Yes, after a morning in court over the last few moments, we've just heard that 63-year-old Hugh Edwards has been given a 6-month jail sentence, suspended for 2 years with a requirement to complete a sex offender programme.
We'll have more details from the court in the programme. Also coming up this lunchtime, police in Florida question a man named as 58-year-old Ryan Routh, who's suspected of trying to assassinate Donald Trump on a golf course. Sir Keir Starmer meets the Italian Prime Minister, hoping to learn lessons from how Italy has dramatically reduced the number of migrants arriving there.
Baby reindeer!
And the British hit TV drama Baby Reindeer steals the show at the Emmy Awards in Los Angeles.
Can you let go of my hand?
And coming up on BBC News, Glasgow stands by for the next Commonwealth Games. The Scottish city is set to be announced as the 2026 host, stepping in for Australia.
Good afternoon. In the last few minutes, the former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has been given a 6-month suspended prison sentence after he admitted making indecent images of children as young as 7. Westminster Magistrates Court heard how he gave hundreds of pounds to a convicted paedophile after being sent pornographic images. His defence barrister said Hugh Edwards is truly sorry. The Chief Magistrate told him his reputation is in tatters. Let's get the latest from Seema Katecha, who's at the court. Seema.
Yes, after a busy morning in court, we've heard both from the prosecution and the defence regarding Hugh Edwards. What is significant is the profound apology that was put forward by his legal team. Let me read it to you. Philip Evans-Casey told the court Mr Edwards wishes to apologise. He wishes the court to know how profoundly sorry he is. He recognises the repugnant nature of such images and the hurt that is done to those who appear in such images. He recognises he has betrayed the priceless trust and faith of so many people. We know that the 63-year-old received hundreds of indecent images. 41 of them were of children, 7 of them of an extreme sexual nature, and 2 of them were of a child between the ages of 7 and 9. But today he has shown how remorseful he is. It's something the Chief Magistrate took into account when sentencing him. We're still hearing comments from the magistrate in the last minute or or so, he told Edwards that he had concluded that the custody threshold had been crossed. He said the appropriate sentence would be 12 months for the most severe abuse images. However, taking into account the mitigation and early guilty pleas, the sentence would be 6 months suspended for 2 years. We also heard that Edwards will be placed on the sex offender register for 7 years, meaning he has to notify the police of his whereabouts. A massive fall from grace from somebody who was the face of BBC News, now a convicted sex offender who has been given a suspended prison sentence.
Seema, thank you very much indeed. Seema, we'll be back with you in a moment. Let's get more details, though, on the background to the case with our correspondent, Helena Wilkinson.
This is Hugh Edwards' custody image taken after his arrest, released moments after he was sentenced. A far cry from the polished and highly respected BBC newsreader he once was. Earlier, he arrived at court to face his sentence. No answer as he went in to questions about whether he wanted to apologise for his crimes. In court, though, through his lawyer, he did say sorry for what he said were truly repugnant images and the hurt done. He listened as the prosecutor laid out the distressing details. Hugh Edwards was sent hundreds of images by another man. 41 of them were indecent images of children. On one occasion, the man asked if Hugh Edwards wanted more images of young people. He replied, "Go on." Another time, he said, "Amazing."
Tonight at 10, thousands of police officers...
Up until last year, Hugh Edwards was the most high-profile newsreader. He presented the 10 o'clock news, as well as election and royal coverage.
BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme, reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen.
Hugh Edwards was suspended from the BBC last July. The Sun had published a story about sordid images being bought by an unnamed TV presenter from a young person. He was later named as that presenter. Hugh Edwards was then arrested over the possession of other images unrelated to the original allegations. In April, he resigned from the BBC. 2 months later, he was charged with making indecent images of children. Then in July, Hugh Edwards appeared in court and pleaded guilty. The victims of Hugh Edwards' crimes were children.
Behind every image is a vulnerable child that has been violated, that has been subject to abuse, and the continuing sort of distribution of those images only goes to service that demand.
Hugh Edwards has been sentenced to 6 months in prison, suspended for 2 years. It's a huge fall from grace for a man who was described by the Chief Magistrate as perhaps the most recognised newsreader in the UK. Hugh Edwards was also told it wasn't an exaggeration to say his reputation was in tatters. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
You are watching BBC News. Well, we'll continue with this coverage and to speak to Paul Connew, the former editor of the Sunday Mirror newspaper. Also, Paul, you're a media commentator. Just to let you know that we have, throughout this broadcast, changed presenters. You're speaking to Kasia Madera now, and we're just digesting for our audience that the former BBC News presenter Hugh Edwards has been given a suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse image offences, meaning that he will not be going to prison. Just, Paul, let's get your reaction.
It's worth noting here that initially the Sun newspaper came in for quite a bit of criticism when they first did the story about Hugh Edwards paying a 17-year-old for explicit poses. Now, that didn't lead to any prosecution because the 17-year-old was over the age of consent. But without that initial story, this whole scandal probably wouldn't have emerged. And I think that this morning people will be astonished by the fact that for 4 years, apparently, he was in contact with Alex Williams, the paedophile who provided the images and the videos. And so the mental turmoil his mitigation team put forward which obviously the Chief Magistrate took on board, that included the period when he was the face of the BBC News, heading with news at 10 and delivering solemnly the stories of Prince Philip's death, the Queen's death, and indeed King Charles III coronation. I think the public will find this absolutely staggering, and it's going to lead, I think, to a lot of media commentary on and opinion leader columns and columnists opining on whether this was the appropriate sentence or not. But it's certainly, as falls from grace go, it's a spectacular one. And when you see that mugshot of Hugh Edwards, that police mugshot, it brings it all home dramatically.
You're pointing to that period of when Philip Evans KC was talking about the services being provided in 2019 and late 2020. You're talking about how they were trying to link it to the period of the lockdowns and the pandemic, which most of our viewers will recall so well.
Yes, indeed. And also you had on this morning a very experienced specialist lawyer in child abuse cases, who made the point, quite rightly, that these days, in about 4 out of 5 cases, even where it's the most serious category A bracket, people don't go to prison. Whether that's because of a change of sentencing policy or prison overcrowding, or maybe a combination of both, I don't know. But it's certainly true that several years ago, a category A offence would usually lead to a real prison sentence rather than a suspended one. So to that extent, Hugh Edwards has been fortunate.
OK, well, Paul Connew, former editor of the Sunday Mirror newspaper and media commentator, thank you very much for being with us as we were awaiting that sentencing of Hugh Edwards, which we have broken on BBC News. Just to remind our viewers who are potentially joining us that the former BBC News presenter Hugh Edwards has been given a suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse image offences, meaning that he does avoid jail. Let's cross over to talk to Dino Nociveli, a partner at the law firm Lide. You're also an experienced lawyer in child sexual abuse claims. Can I just initially get your reaction to this sentencing?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, and there's been lots of discussion about the potential sentence for Hugh Edwards. Obviously, it's 6 months in theory, and it's suspended for 2 years. So he'll never spend a day in prison, potentially, for his crimes. And then on a sex offenders register for 7 years, when most would argue that if you're a sex offender, you should be on it for life. And I agree with that. The key thing from today is that he has been convicted and sentenced now as a child abuser, and he's apologised not only to the children in those images, but to his family and to society for letting them all down.
Of course, at the heart of this are the children, and it's really critical just to remind and remember and have them in the forefront of our minds. But I just wonder, just in terms of the legalities of this, when you talk about creating an image, how does that work legally? Because arguably there's that difficulty in understanding what it means to create an image. How does that work in legal terms for lay people? If you could just talk us through that.
Yeah, I think the layperson term, someone thinks creating it is in, you make the image yourself. But for the criminal law, downloading an image would also suffice. The children should be the paramount concern in this case. In most sexual abuse cases, the victims can provide a victim impact statement to talk about the impact of the abuse on them. Sadly, in child abuse cases which involves images and videos such as this, those victims don't get a voice. They aren't able to provide that impact statement. I feel for them today, and I hope that they feel a sense of justice for what Hugh Edwards has done.
And we've just had the Crown Prosecution Service, a statement from them saying that accessing indecent images of children perpetuates the sexual exploitation of them, which has a deep, long-lasting trauma for these victims. I wonder if you could just speak to that, because as you say, these victims do not have a voice in all of this as these images are sent on from person to person.
Yeah, it's easy to think that these images are just that, it's just a photograph, and it's disregarding the child, what the child had to go through in that moment, and also the long-term impact on them. It isn't going to be resolved for that child in a matter of 6 months or 2 years. It can affect their mental health, their prospects of education, employment, drink, alcohol, relationships, trust. It is so significant, and often abuse can be a lifelong sentence for abuse survivors and victims. Is the sentence that Hugh Edwards got, is it proportionate? Is it fair? Is it balanced? There's going to be numerous questions about that going forward. And also for all the other abusers, which are predominantly men, which view these images and videos of children suffering sexual abuse. What are we going to do as a government? We know there's financial issues. We know there's limited prison spaces. We need to fix this endemic issue of child abuse in this country.
The CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service's statement, this is from Claire Brinton from the CPS, is saying that this prosecution sends a clear message that the CPS, working alongside, of course, the police force, will bring to justice those who seek to exploit children wherever that abuse takes place. From your perspective as working within this legally, with your experience, does it send a clear message that offenders will be brought to justice?
I don't think it does, to be totally frank. I don't think it's proportionate to the impact on survivors' lives. I also, with absolute respect to the CPS and the police, who do a really good job and an important work, they have limited resources and funding. My clients who are abuse survivors are facing increasing waiting and delays to provide statements to the police. For criminal trials to take place, sometimes they're waiting 5-6 years of delays for criminal trials, and then sentencing to receive criminal sentence, which is a 6-month period, but you only spend a maximum of 3 or 4 months in prison, but actually suspended, so you'll never spend a day in prison. I don't know if it acts as a clear deterrent to say that abuse is unacceptable and that you be punished, similar to riots on our streets, and that you be punished, similar to riots on our streets and other offences. I don't know if it acts as a true punishment to show the severity of the crimes you committed and the injuries you've inflicted upon children. I'm really unsure. And from the survivors I represent, I think that the sentencing guidelines do need to be reconsidered as soon as they possibly can, and that we do need to make more availability in prisons to deal with the issue of sexual offenders and child abusers.
Dino, from the perspective, use your voice, from the perspective of those survivors that you represent, you spoke about the lack of resources for, say, the CPS, for these kind of investigations to take place. How do survivors cope? How do they rebuild after something like this?
Survivors are amazing in that the resilience to go through abuse. And on average, it takes an abuse survivor 30 years to disclose abuse. And that's on average. Lots of people take it to their deathbed, sadly. It's knowing that the truth will always come out, that good must always prevail over evil. These aren't cliches. The fact is, in society, we cannot allow bad people to prosper, and that everyone should pay for the crimes they commit. The limited resources means that often they're looking for a token gesture of justice or closure, and that often it's not proportionate to the impact on their lives. You know, if you're waiting 5 or 6 years for a criminal case and your abuser gets, a portion of that, your life has been placed on hold, waiting for that closure and justice. It needs greater focus. We've had an inquiry into childhood sexual abuse, which was published in October 2022, 20 recommendations. Again, it's another inquiry where nothing's done. Not one recommendation's been implemented nearly 2 years on. We need this government to now stand up, to act on child abuse and these allegations, to deal with this crime, to be hard on this crime. we need to stop the cycle of abuse because there is no cure to it. We need to prevent it as much as we can do. And that does involve greater resourcing into the criminal justice system, in my opinion.
Dino, thank you for speaking on behalf of the survivors, for giving them a voice. Dino Nocivelli, partner at Lide, a law firm, Dino, with experience, huge experience as a lawyer in child sexual abuse claims. Thank you so much. So we are continuing to monitor the situation at Westminster Magistrates Court. My colleague there, our senior UK correspondent, Seema Kotecha, has been with us throughout the morning there. And Seema, we finally have the sentencing on the former BBC presenter, Hugh Edwards.
Yes, so we're expecting Hugh Edwards to exit the doors behind me any moment now. The hearing has finished. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail, suspended for 2 years with a requirement to complete a sex offender programme. The court heard both from the prosecution and the defence. There were many mitigating factors put forward by his defence, including his mental health, his character, also how remorseful he was because of his crimes. A very lengthy apology was put forward by his legal team where he said he felt deeply sorry about what he did and he was very upset about the impact it had on the people that he loved. So after hearing that, the magistrate took some time out to consider the sentence and came back and delivered it. He told Edwards that he had concluded that the custody threshold had been crossed. The appropriate sentence would be 12 months for the most severe abuse images, he said. However, taking into account the mitigation and the early guilty plea, which he made back in July, the sentence would be 6 months, suspended for 2 years. We know that Alex Williams, the man who sent him those images, was given a suspended sentence for 12 months. The magistrate says that Edwards did not pose a risk to the public or children and an immediate custodial sentence was not necessary because the evidence showed, he said, that he could be rehabilitated. The suspended sentence comes with requirements to complete a sex offender programme and further rehabilitative sessions, work that is overseen by the probation service. Now, Edwards will be placed on the sex offender register for 7 years, meaning the police will monitor his whereabouts. He will need to let them know where he is. As I said, the sentencing is complete. He left the dock with his team exiting the court. He went to see the probation service, that's what we understand, and he appears to have let out a sigh, perhaps of relief, knowing that he will not be spending tonight behind bars.
And Seema, as we speak, I just want to bring to our viewers a statement from the BBC in which a spokesperson for the BBC says that we are appalled by his crimes. He has betrayed not just the BBC, but audiences who put their trust in him. That statement just coming in from the BBC here to us at BBC News. Seema, so just talk us through as I bring that statement from the BBC to our viewers. What is the procedure now? What are we waiting for at Westminster Magistrates Court?
Yes, I mean, the BBC has said this before. We heard from the chairman, Samir Shah, after he pleaded guilty to those 3 counts, that he felt that Hugh Edwards was the villain in this piece. We also heard that the Director General was trying to get the £200,000 back that Hugh Edwards earned between November, when he was arrested, to April, when he left the BBC this year on medical grounds. So the BBC has made abundantly clear how it feels about this. But it has been criticised by some for continuing to pay Hugh Edwards from when he was arrested, when a small number of people in the organisation knew that he'd been arrested over serious offences. But some in the legal world have said that the BBC was right to do what it did, that he was innocent until proven otherwise, and it would have been premature and morally wrong to have stopped paying him.
And Seema, I think it's just worth just reminding our viewers joining us what the sentencing is, because there are it's a number of elements to it. That's a 6-month suspended sentence, but of course Hugh Edwards will be on the sex offenders register for 7 years, as you were outlining.
I mean, yes, this is an enormous fall from grace, isn't it? I mean, Hugh Edwards was the anchor of the prestigious 10 o'clock news. He worked at the BBC for more than 40 years, and not only did he that, he also presented significant programmes such as the election programme, which he took over from David Dimbleby in 2019. This man was the face of BBC News. He was one of its highest stars, paid almost £500,000 last year alone. He was given a £40,000 pay rise. He was seen as the trusted voice of news, the man who announced the Queen's death to the nation. And now he's a convicted sex offender who has been given a serious sentence, a suspended sentence, meaning he won't go to prison, but if he breaks the law during the period of the sentence, meaning he won't go to prison, but if he breaks the law during the period of the sentence, which is 2 years, he will do, and he will also have to take part in a sex offender programme.
And as you say, a fall from grace. Hugh Edwards, a household name. That image that we're showing alongside you, Seema, is a photograph which was taken of Hugh Edwards just after his arrest in November, a stark contrast to that career that you were talking about previously.
Yes, that's right. A mugshot has been released. The photograph was taken of Edwards when he was arrested back in November. It's the first time we've seen it after the Metropolitan Police released it today. As I said, it will have been an incredibly difficult few years for Hugh Edwards, or a couple of years at least, since allegations came to light, and especially since he was arrested in November. And when he was arrested, we didn't know what the offences were. They came to light in June when he was charged, and then in July when he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children, which he pleaded guilty to. That was used as mitigation as well, that he pleaded guilty at the first court appearance possible, where he admitted his crimes, and that was taken into account by the Chief Magistrate when he made his sentencing remarks earlier.
OK, well, for the time being, Seema, as always, thanks so much for being there at Westminster's Magistrates Court. Seema Kasia there, who has spent the whole morning just covering those events there, now that we have the sentencing of Hugh Edwards. And as Seema was touching upon there in her broadcast there, Hugh Edwards was, of course, one of the most trusted, one of the most recognisable faces on British television. But he has now been given that suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse image offences, which does mean that he does avoid going to prison. Now, until last year, he was, of course, one of the main presenters on the BBC's News at 10 and often fronted coverage of major national events. But his sentencing marks the end of a career in broadcasting, which has spanned more than 40 years. Our media and arts correspondent David Silito has this report.
Mind your back! Mind your back!
Hugh Edwards. For decades, the calm, trusted face of BBC News. And here, arriving in court in July, facing charges over possession of indecent images of children. Minutes later, he would plead guilty to all 3 charges. 41 images, 7 Class A, the most serious classification. To the crowds outside, there was no visible emotion, just the familiar demeanour of one of television's best-known faces. For 20 years, he fronted the News at 10.
Tonight at 10, thousands of police officers deployed.
He's also been the face of the BBC for elections.
So, as Big Ben reaches 10 o'clock...
Political crises.
And we're live in Downing Street, where...
And royal and state occasions.
Welcome to Windsor.
But it was a newspaper headline that changed everything.
So we're just going live to Westminster Magistrates Court, where the former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards is now leaving the building. He has been given a suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse image offences, meaning that he does avoid going to prison. So a lot of media interest, a lot of press there, including our colleague Seema Kasia, as Hugh Edwards leaves Westminster Magistrates Court here in central London. Following that sentencing, the suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse images. And just to add, as Hugh Edwards drives away, he will also be required to complete a sex offenders programme. He will also be on the sex offenders register for 7 years. So just monitoring that live shot as Hugh Edwards left Westminster Magistrates Court, and a media scrum there, as you would understandably predict. We have had previously, a few moments ago, a statement from the BBC on the sentencing saying that the BBC we are appalled by the crimes he has betrayed, not just the BBC, but the audiences who put their trust in him. So that BBC statement coming into BBC News from a spokesperson there saying that we are appalled for his crimes. He has betrayed not just the BBC, but the audiences who put their trust in him. And of course, a lot of more reaction had come in from the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, who had issued a statement as well saying that this sentencing sends a clear message that the CPS, we will bring offenders to justice. Claire Brinton from the CPS saying that accessing indecent images of children perpetuates the sexual exploitation of them, which has deep, long-lasting trauma for these victims. The CPS and the Metropolitan Police were able to prove that Edwards was receiving illegal images and videos involving children via WhatsApp, and that this prosecution sends a clear message that the CPS, working alongside the police, will work to bring to justice those who seek to exploit children. And the image that we are showing you is a photo that was taken of Hugh Edwards after his arrest in November. Today is the first time that we are seeing it. It was released by the Metropolitan Police, and this custody images of these offenders are often released after they are sentenced, which is why we are seeing this image of Hugh Edwards for the first time, although it was taken after his arrest back in November. So we've just witnessed that live shot of Hugh Edwards leaving Westminster's Magistrates Court after that sentencing, a suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse images offences, and including that he will be required to complete a sex offenders programme, and he will be on the sex offenders register for 7 years. So Paul Connew, former media editor at The Mirror, rejoins us. I know you've been with us all day, Paul, as we watch there live Hugh Edwards leave Westminster Magistrates Court. Obviously that suspended sentence means, as I mentioned beforehand, he does not spend time in prison.
Unless, of course, he reoffends. I think you're going to have probably a less sympathetic, that's quite the word, reaction in the court of public opinion, and indeed across much of social media and parts of the mainstream media over the sentence. I think a lot of people will actually think it should have been on the sex offenders register for life rather than 7 years. But it's not the end of the story in terms of the BBC, who quite rightly issued a damning statement a few minutes ago. But the political fallout isn't over, as well as the media fallout. I'm told that the media and culture select committee almost certainly will want to investigate the BBC's handling of the Hugh Edwards case, including the continued payment of his salary. And they will also, I'm sure, as part of that, want to grill the chairman, the director general, and possibly some other senior executives. And let's not forget, there's been turmoil within the BBC here. I know BBC journalists who were dismayed that they were in the dark even after senior figures were aware of the nature, not the exact detail, but the nature of the charges that the investigation and likely charges against Hugh Edwards. And if you remember, Newsnight came into some criticism internally when they did an item about improper messages to younger colleagues, where some in the BBC thought that was being disloyal rather than doing legitimate investigative journalism. There's a matter of opinion on that, but certainly the BBC have some awkward questions to answer still. Both, I'm sure they're going to still get a lot of criticism in the media and social media, but also, as I said, they will be facing political questions too.
Paul, obviously a very difficult situation. And as you said, we have had that statement from the BBC. The BBC also over the weekend was talking about that it's important to remember who the villain in all of this is, as we also remember the victims in all of this.
Yes, I mean, I'm the editor who was legally thwarted in 1994 from exposing Jimmy Savile. They're very different cases, but the common denominator, I mean, I appeared in documentaries for the BBC looking into the BBC's own failures on it. It does raise the question of whether big name stars, big talent as they're known, don't get the same scrutiny that they should have. And there's almost a fear of investigating rumours or allegations or claims. And a few days ago, we had an open letter criticising calling for Hugh Edwards to go to jail from the mother of the 17-year-old who figured in that original Sun story. I suspect that she will be appearing in at least one newspaper tomorrow criticising the fact that he's not going to jail. This story is going to run for some time yet. It's BBC would like, I'm sure, understandably, for this to be closure, but it's not going to be closure. And the headlines tomorrow will reflect that, even on a day when you had an assassination attempt again on Donald Trump and a very important trip to Italy by the Prime Minister. I still think that public opinion is on balance going to hold the view that the sentence today was too light, rightly or wrongly. That's not a personal opinion of mine. It's what I think the public reaction will be across social media and from some of the mainstream newspapers.
Well, the CPS is saying that in their statement is saying that this sends a clear message, that they say that this will bring a message that they do bring offenders to justice. We were just talking to a highly experienced lawyer who deals with such cases.
He was sceptical about that, yeah.
Who was, yes, he didn't feel that was the case at all. What's your assessment?
It's a huge check. This is a major problem. Online child abuse, and it'd be interesting to see if the Edwards case in any way becomes drawn into the still pending online harm bill that's going through Parliament. But the police have a huge challenge on hands purely because of the number of offences, and it's very hard to tackle. Yes. Obviously, people are brought to justice, but a lot get away with it. And as your experienced lawyer commentator was saying, people wait for years for justice on this to even make complaint statements. It is very, very difficult. This is a massive problem, and Hugh Edwards, in a sense, just represents the huge, high-profile downfall of a household name, but. Household names are one thing, there are children being abused on and offline that are being buried and are not getting anywhere near the police, or certainly not anywhere near a courtroom and a prosecution.
Where, just then, in terms of where the money needs to be spent in order to speed this up, because as you mentioned, our lead lawyer was saying that this impacts people. It can take 30 years, if ever, kind of working through it, the victims of this. So where do resources need to be aimed at in order to speed up the process, but also to stop it from happening in the first place?
Without being flip, that's a question you need to direct at Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. In times when budgets are tight, the country is in a fiscal crisis, whether you argue whether it's 22 billion or a bit less. it's going to be difficult to actually put the money into that budget. Of course, morally it should be, but I wonder where the monetary is coming from. I'm sure we'll have from the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, we'll have damning statements about the Edwards case, but I don't see them suddenly coming up, shaking a magic money tree about, huge amounts being put into investigations into child abuse online or off, which means that the justice system, that the police and the CPS struggle.
As you say, there are a number of big news stories on today, not least the attempted assassination attempt of the former President Donald Trump. As you mentioned, you've got Sir Keir Starmer is in Rome. He is meeting with his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni. They're talking about migration at the top of the agenda there, and no doubt lots of other issues. Hence, possibly why we haven't quite yet had a statement from the Prime Minister on this. But just what does this say in terms of our media agenda, you as a former expert in all of this, that we are focusing in on this headline?
Despite Trump, despite the Prime Minister's trip to Italy, I'm sure that at least some of tomorrow's national newspapers will be leading on Hugh Edwards. And I'm sure that leader columns and probably some columnists will be commenting on whether this is the right sentence or he's got off relatively lightly. Despite the mitigation, I think a lot of people will feel that justice hasn't fully been served here. Again, I stress that's not a personal opinion, but it's how I see the landscape in the media over this case. It's also worth remembering, I'm sure, I haven't heard it specified, but I imagine that part of the sentence will mean that Hugh Edwards won't have access to a computer in the future.
It's an interesting point, Paul, and apologies for interrupting and speaking over you, but we've just got to move on. Paul Connew there, who is the former editor of the Sunday Mirror newspaper, media commentator who spent the morning with us. Really appreciate that. We are crossing over to speak to our culture and media editor, Katie Razzle, who joins us live from the newsroom. And Katie, we're just digesting this news, this sentencing, and the end of Hugh Edwards' career, arguably.
Absolutely. I think not arguably 100% the end of his career. And that was one of the things that the magistrate said. The barrister speaking on behalf of Hugh Edwards said one of the mitigating factors was the fact that he's had this huge fall from grace, that he has lost his standing within the BBC but also across the nation, that he was arguably the most trusted face of journalists, the most recognisable journalist in the country, as the magistrate put it, and that has all fallen and gone. But the magistrate said, I'm not taking that into account in mitigation because, as he said to Hugh Edwards, you have brought this upon yourself. And there was a moment in court where I did wonder whether he was going to give him a custodial sentence. He said, the magistrate, that these are very serious offences against children and that he would be facing a 12-month custodial sentence, but that there were these mitigating factors. And those mitigating factors included the fact that Hugh Edwards had pleaded guilty at the very first opportunity, so that was the court appearance in July, the fact that he was showing, as the magistrate put it, genuine remorse, the fact that he was suffering from a mental health disorder, particularly through the period of time when he was engaging with this person, Alex Williams, who'd contacted him on social media and then started to send him these images, explicit images, including these 41 images, indecent images of children. So the magistrate took all of those into account when he suspended the sentence for Hugh Edwards and said he was getting a suspended 6-month sentence and would need to take part in a compulsory sex offender prevention programme, amongst other things.
Indeed. Katie, as always, many thanks. Katie Razzle there, our media editor. Thank you so much. We do have a live page on that, but I'm just going to take you to Italy. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is in Rome, as we already mentioned, meeting the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. They are issuing a press conference right now, so let's just dip in and have a listen.
We want to follow the footsteps of what the UK and has already done through the so-called Rome process. We want to, with the voluntary assisted repatriation processes that we want to further increase. And we also agree on the fact that we must not shy away from new, brave other options. And we mentioned here Italy-Albania agreement, and the UK government has shown great interest in this agreement. And of course, we have shared with him all the contents of this agreement. When it comes to migration flows, economic relations are very intense in terms of investments, in terms of as you know, the Italian community in the UK is one of the largest community abroad. 600,000 people, many businesses working in the UK, UK investments in Italy. So this is something that we want to further develop. This morning, Prime Minister has met various CEOs of major Italian and UK businesses, and there's, I think, a huge potential here to tap into. And I think when it comes to 500 million euros investments is another evidence of this willingness to further enhance our bilateral relation and to further enhance trade. One aspect of this cooperation is also the more strategic raw materials and innovative materials, a global compact air program. This means joint development together with UK and Japan, a sixth generation aircraft by 2035. This is a project which also represents opportunities and which further contributes to developing European defence industry, because European defence industry is something which is of major interest for all European countries. And we're also working on a protocol on science, and this is, and here we refer to science, technology and innovation. We're also working together to further develop the opportunities of exchange of our students, and here we're trying to find innovative solutions. So in other words, Italy wants to further enhance this very good relationship between Italy and the UK, and we want to also support the UK in its effort to further develop increased cooperation with the EU while respecting, of course, the post-Brexit rules, and within this framework, of course, protecting the rights of Italian residents who reside in the UK. And as we said, this is a very large Italian community. We've also made reference to cooperation within the G7 and NATO framework. So, of course, we mentioned the war in Ukraine, and we confirm here again our support to Kyiv, and our ultimate goal is to put an end to this war, help Ukraine in having a future of peace, freedom and prosperity. Of course, with the support that is needed today and the support which is needed for the reconstruction. In 2025, Italy will host a Ukraine recovery conference, which was held in 2023 in London, and this is another instance of our synergies. And we've mentioned the Middle East, and of course we can no longer postpone a global agreement based on mediation by US and Qatar, which is calling for the ceasefire and the immediate release of all hostages. And we also need to guarantee humanitarian assistance. Italy calls on all the actors involved, and of course it stands ready to play its role. We are on the front line to counteract any escalation cooperation in the area, starting from Lebanon. We've also talked about this. Today it is of primary importance to find a long-term solution to the crisis, which may give the possibility of talking about a two-state solution. So this was a very important meeting that we had today. We have reached very important results. So I am very satisfied with this meeting here today. I'm sure that very satisfied with this meeting here today. I'm sure that this is just the first of a long series of meetings. Keith, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Georgia. This is my first visit here to Italy as Prime Minister, so it's really great to be here today in such a fantastic setting, fantastic weather. The perfect venue, I think, to follow on from Blenheim Palace just a few weeks ago. And actually, this is the first in a series of landmark meetings in Italy this week. We have the G7 Culture Ministers meeting in Napoli. We have Arsenal meeting Atalanta in the Champions League. But seriously, there's so much that brings us together. But I am here today for a very simple reason, because I recognise Italy's significance as a leader in Europe, on the world stage, as a G7 economy, a NATO ally. And so as we open what I think will be a new era in Britain's relations with the EU, our close friendship and partnership with Italy is more important than ever. And that's why it was very important for me to come so early on in my term as Prime Minister as a real statement of intent. And I think we're both ambitious for what we can do together. And that spirit has come through all of our long conversations so far, not only today, but on the previous occasions when we've had the chance to discuss a number of issues, but very much today, a resolve to work together for the good of the British and Italian people, for the security, stability and growth that we all want to see, and for the fundamental values that we share of democracy, justice, the rule of law. So, as you say, we used our time today to discuss the global challenges before us and our determination to meet them together. Georgia, I want to thank you for your strong leadership, particularly on Ukraine, because as Russia continues to escalate its illegal war, we will stand together, shoulder to shoulder, to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. We will work together, as we discussed, to deliver the 50 billion euros in loans for Ukraine under your G7 presidency. And I look forward to supporting the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Italy next year. We also agreed to deepen our security cooperation, already very important for both of us. Our forces will continue to exercise together through NATO. The Italian Navy will join UK carrier operations next year. And with vital projects like GCAP, we're determined to work together to boost our defence industrial capacity. On the Middle East, we are united in our support for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We want to see the release of all hostages, desperately needed humanitarian aid flowing into Gaza, and a calming of tensions on the West Bank in particular. And of course, as we discussed, none of this is easy, but it is urgent and it is vital. So we will keep working together to resolve this crisis and end the suffering on all sides. We also discussed the challenge of irregular migration. This is a problem across Europe for both of our countries in particular, but across Europe. As Director of Public Prosecutions in Britain some years ago, I saw the important work that can be done across borders on issues like counter-terrorism. And I've never accepted, as we discussed, that we can't do the same with smuggling gangs. And now, of course, Italy has shown that we can. You've made remarkable progress working with countries along migration routes as equals to address the drivers of migration at source and to tackle the gangs. And as a result, irregular arrivals to Italy by sea are down 60% since 2022. So I'm pleased that we're deepening our cooperation here, led on the UK side by our new border security commander, who has been with me today here in Italy at the coordination centre this morning, to share intelligence, share tactics, shut down smuggler routes and smash the gangs. Finally, as leading European economies, we also discussed the huge opportunities that we can realise together. Italy is already a top 10 trading partner for the UK and our 6th largest source of foreign direct investment. That all supports economic growth, which is the #1 mission of this government. And there's real potential now to go forward. It was excellent to have a business event first thing this morning when I met Italian businesses who are actually already working in the UK. And I'm really pleased to announce that we've secured 2 new investments worth over £500 million into our economy. Leonardo investing over £400 million into R&D and helicopter manufacturing in Yeovil, and Marcia Gallia investing £100 million into green steel production in Sheffield, supporting hundreds of jobs across the country. Those are the 2 investment decisions I can announce today. We, of course, want to go further in key sectors like defence, green tech, science and innovation to drive growth for both sides, create jobs and improve people's lives. Because underneath all of this, it is important to say that there's a huge affection between our 2 nations and between our people. Great respect for each other's cultures, shared passions, shared values. So today we're building on that, optimistic about what we can achieve together as strong partners, allies and friends. Thank you, Georgia.
Grazie, abbiamo 4 domande, iniziamo con Francesco
For
Maisano
questions,
del
we will
TG1.
begin with Francesco Maisano. Good afternoon to you both. You spoke about cooperation for the fight against human traffickers. How will this cooperation play out? In what way the UK also looks to the Albanian model and the relationship between Italy and Albania, and also an update on the time it will take to implement this project? Thank you so much. Well, how this cooperation will play out in real life. Let's say that we are focusing, as you know, the strategy that the Italian government has put in place in order to counter illegal migration is very broad. And there is a cooperation in place on a 360-degree radius. On the one hand, countering traffickers of human beings, and on this front, the work that we are doing is mostly a way to perhaps extend the work done by our law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies, involving also other institutions. And in the future, we would like to really make sure that our legislation is in greater harmony in the future. Right now, we are dealing with human traffickers, heinous organizations, and they're very powerful, and they have long tentacles spreading everywhere. Now you make a deal with a trafficker in Bangladesh, then you can cross 5 countries and reach Italy on a dinghy. And this goes to show what the magnitude is that we're dealing with. No nation by itself can be effective in dismantling these networks of traffickers if we do not work on a 360-degree radius, first of all, involving our allies and partners, but all the countries of origin and transit. The work that we are doing on this, we are doing very specific kind of work to see how, together, in a more structured way, our law enforcement and intelligence services can work together, and how we can involve, as I was saying earlier, how we better involve Interpol and Europol, facilities that are already there. And from my standpoint, they should have specific departments or sections dedicated to this. For sure, these are subjects that we need to discuss with all the other partners, but this is what we are talking about on the one hand. On the other hand, you know that there's all the work of cooperation with African countries, which is something that the UK is also interested in, and on which we are trying to find synergies, starting from the G7 that we spoke about, those initiatives with which we hammered out the Global Gateway by the EU, the Madera Plan, PIIG, from the G7, to understand how this new cooperation with African countries, perhaps this too can also lead to networking for the work done at European level. And also we have the voluntary assisted returns, and the UK has already dedicated energies on this for the voluntary assisted returns or repatriations to Libya, to look for solutions to help the nations of North Africa, which otherwise risk being left alone in front of massive flows that come from other countries as well. So it's an extensive kind of work. Albania, well, I have seen that the Prime Minister was very interested in what we're doing, but for sure he should be the one to speak about this. But indeed, the model that the Italian government has conceived of centres to process asylum applications for those immigrants who disembark within Italian or EU legislation or European legislation in a foreign country. That was a model that was never experimented with before. If it works, as I hope it will, everybody can understand that this can become, let's say, a new way, really, to deal with migration flows. Also because of the element of deterrence that this creates vis-à-vis relying on criminal organizations to reach Europe. And this is the reason why, as you all know by now, we've been working on this project very rigorously. And from what I understand, it will take a few more weeks before it is perfect. But as I mentioned earlier, it would have been better if it had started earlier. I know that the world is watching us, and rightly so. Therefore, I think that we have to do this in the best possible way. And if we need a few extra days, as I was okay with this a few weeks ago, I will be okay with this now as well. But we're talking about a few weeks.
Alex Forsyth
from BBC.
Thank you very much. Keir Starmer, on migration, you say that you're interested in the Albania scheme. Can you be clear? How seriously are you looking at the prospect of sending migrants to other countries for their claims to be processed? And are you entirely comfortable with every aspect of Italy's approach, given the human rights concerns that have been expressed? And to Prime Minister Meloni, was there a single piece of advice you gave Keir Starmer when it comes to tackling this issue? And what do you say to those who accuse you of human rights violations when it comes to migrants? Thank you.
Let me try to bundle both the answer to the previous question and the answer to that question up together. Look, what we discussed today is a common challenge, which is irregular migration. And we discussed in particular law enforcement on the one side, how do you deal with this by collaborating, cooperating, sharing data, intelligence, etc., but also the prevention piece. And that's why I had the new Border Security Commander with me today at the Coordination Centre, so we could look at where we can do even more closely related work on enforcement, sharing our data, sharing our analysis, sharing our intelligence, and sharing our strategies. And in relation, we discussed the Albania arrangement, which isn't up and running yet, as you know, and therefore we don't yet know the outcome of it, but we discussed the concept of it, along with the prevention piece as well, because the numbers here, as I've said, have gone down quite significantly. That's actually not attributable, of course, to the Albania scheme, because that hasn't started. That, in my view, is more likely attributable to the work that the Prime Minister has done upstream, as it were, with some of the countries where migrants are coming from and the particular details and the approach that's been taken. I've always made the argument